The 1% think differently. Here's how. The 1% don't live like the rest of the world. Not because they're lucky or chosen or born into some divine privilege. They live different because they think different. They see the world through a different lens. Where most see obstacles, they see opportunities. Where most freeze in fear, they move with purpose. Where most need permission, they give themselves orders. They've trained their minds to rebel against mediocrity. And it begins with one core truth. Everything you've ever wanted is already within you, but you'll never access it by thinking like the 99%. The 99% think in circles. They think in excuses. They think in what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. They wait for motivation, for inspiration, for someone else to validate their vision. They hope for good fortune, but prepare to settle. They drift. But the 1%, they don't wait. They decide, they build, they act. Their mind is their master weapon. It's not reactive, it's directive. They don't follow trends, they set them. They don't follow emotion, they lead it. They don't shrink under pressure, they rise in it because they've hardwired one belief into their identity. If I don't shape my future, someone else will. And that is unacceptable. Look at the ones who rewrote history. Steve Jobs didn't invent the computer. He invented how the world relates to it. Elon Musk didn't wait for permission from governments or competitors. He bet everything on vision and velocity. Oprah Winfrey wasn't handed a platform. She carved one out of the wood of rejection and pain. They were not born different. They were not given a golden map. They just thought differently and refused to think any other way. So the question becomes, what separates their mind from yours? It's not genetics, it's not money, it's not timing, it's mental architecture. Let's break it down. Section 1, vision over circumstance. The 1% see the world as clay, not concrete. Most people wake up and respond to life. They react to emails, they react to moods, they react to the weather, the economy, the opinions of strangers. They become a puppet to their surroundings. But the 1% operate from vision, not circumstance. They wake up and command life. Their thoughts are not dictated by what is, but by what could be. Their mornings begin with intent, not scrolling, not guessing, not drifting, but declaring who they are, what they want, and how they will move through the day. They've made a decision that most will never dare to make, to be the architect, not the tenant, to build their life, not rent it. And that starts by asking one question every day: what am I creating? Not what's trending, not what's popular, not what's easy, but what's mine. You can't live like the 1% if you're mimicking the 99%. You can't lead if you're copying. You can't innovate if you're afraid to be misunderstood. That's why the 1% live with vision, because clarity silences noise. And when you're clear, you don't need approval, you need action. Section 2, belief beyond logic. The 1% believe beyond what makes sense. They don't just believe in their dreams, they believe in their ability to bend reality around them. To most, that sounds like delusion, but to the 1%, it's the only way. Logic is the language of the limited. Belief is the weapon of the visionary. They understand that every impossible was once someone's fantasy, until someone had the audacity to believe anyway. Walt Disney was told he lacked imagination. Henry Ford was told he should stick to horses. The Wright brothers were told man would never fly. If they had listened to logic, history would be empty. But they didn't. They installed a belief system that said, the world doesn't define what's possible, I do. And they built from that. The 1% understand that belief is not passive, it is not blind, it is not soft, it is a choice, and that choice must be made daily, especially when doubt screams louder than hope. Section 3, discipline without applause. Here's the truth. The 1% don't love discipline. They are not born robots. They are not naturally more motivated than you. They've just made peace with one reality. You don't have to like the work. You just have to love the outcome. They've disconnected emotion from execution. They do not wait to feel like it. They do not hope for a perfect day, a perfect plan, a perfect mood. They show up regardless, because they understand. Discipline is the bridge between vision and reality. It's the quiet labor no one claps for. It's the early morning run when no one sees. It's the 1000th rep when boredom tries to creep in. It's the email you send after 15 rejections. Discipline is not sexy. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's undefeated. The 1% embrace boredom, because they know what's boring to others is building them. And every unseen effort, it compounds, it stacks, it sharpens, until one day the world calls it overnight success. But you'll know better. You'll know it was discipline, invisible, relentless, non-negotiable. Section 4. Failure as fuel. The 99% see failure as a wall, the 1% see it as a forge. To the average mind, failure is shame, it's rejection, it's proof that you're not enough. But to the 1%, failure is instruction. It's a map, it's feedback, it's sharpening. They do not avoid failure, they invite it. Why? Because failure is the fastest path to truth, and truth is power. Every rejection, it's redirection. Every stumble, it's data. Every loss, a lesson. The 1% collect lessons like others collect excuses. Edison, 10,000 failures. Colonel Sanders, rejected over 1,000 times before one person said yes to his chicken. J.K. Rowling, living in poverty when 12 publishers told her no, but they persisted, not because they were unafraid, but because they had made a decision. I will not stop until it's done. Failure did not define them, it refined them. You want to join the 1%? Then stop fearing failure. Start demanding it. Because every great life is built from bricks of defeat, rearranged into foundations of power. Section 5. Inner standards over outer opinions. The 99% live for applause. The 1% live by standard. Most people shape their identity around the approval of others. They adjust based on feedback, judgment, trends. They chase validation like a drug. But the 1%? They operate from a code. A private, unshakable standard that does not bend for applause. They know who they are, they know what they stand for. They don't shift when others doubt, criticize, or misunderstand, because they weren't built for popularity. They were built for impact. And impact rarely comes with permission. That's why the 1% are not easily swayed. They don't shrink when mocked, they don't flinch when doubted, because their standard isn't for sale. What I expect from myself is greater than anything the world could expect from me. That is their mindset. And with that, they walk differently. They carry themselves with quiet certainty. Not arrogance, but alignment. And alignment is what makes them magnetic. Section 6. Identity is everything. The 1% don't try to succeed. They become success. They don't chase the result. They build the identity that achieves it. Because they know you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your self-image. And so they train their identity daily. They don't say, I'm trying to be consistent. They say, I'm the kind of person who always shows up. They don't say, I want to be disciplined. They say, discipline is who I am. This is not pretending, it's installing. Your identity is the thermostat of your life. No matter how high your results spike, you'll always return to what you believe you are. So the 1% don't fake it until they make it. They forge it until it's automatic. They rewire the story. They cast daily votes through action. Votes for the leader, the builder, the visionary, the warrior. Until one day, there's no separation between who they are and who they're becoming. They are one and the same. The 1% don't react to the world, they recreate it. Where the masses see rules, they see raw material. They don't waste time blaming systems, they build new ones. They don't complain about the map, they redraw it. That's why the 1% don't follow trends. They become them. They shape culture. They invent industries. They influence generations. But not because they're superhuman. Because they think differently. They've learned that limits are rarely real. They're accepted. That most ceilings in life are made of thought, not circumstance. They understand this truth. Your outer world is just the echo of your inner one. So they master the inner game first. They engineer their beliefs. They challenge every assumption. They treat doubt as an invitation, not a verdict. They ask, why not me? And they mean it. But let's go even deeper. The 1% don't just set goals. They install identities. They don't say, I want to be rich. They become someone who builds wealth. They don't say, I hope I can lead. They embody leadership in every decision. They don't wait for circumstances to match their vision. They bring their vision to life, one belief at a time. That's why their results look impossible, because most people are trying to change their life without changing who they are. The 1% know you can't outperform your self-image. So they build from the inside out. They ask, what does the next level version of me believe? And then they practice that belief until it becomes their baseline. Not overnight, not once, but daily, repeatedly, ruthlessly. Because they know your brain doesn't believe what's true, it believes what's familiar. So they make greatness familiar. They train their nervous system to expect excellence, to normalize abundance, to operate from power, even when fear knocks at the door. They do the internal reps others ignore. Because while most are chasing tips and tactics, the 1% are upgrading their operating system. Let's be clear, the 1% are not lucky. They're leveraged. They've leveraged pain into power. They've leveraged failure into feedback. They've leveraged discipline into dominance. They've taken the same struggles that break others and turned them into bricks for their foundation. Because here's what they know. Life doesn't get easier. You get stronger. Every obstacle is a test of alignment. Will you react from your old identity or respond from your new one? That's the difference between staying stuck and stepping up. And when you study the greats, Carnegie, Ford, Chopra, you'll see the pattern. They didn't wait for the world to validate their vision. They validated it through action. They didn't need everyone to agree. They just needed to agree with themselves. That's what made them unstoppable. But there's more. The 1% don't just master themselves, they master time. They don't spend time, they invest it. They treat every hour like equity in their future. They don't kill time with distractions, they weaponize it with intention. They plan with purpose, execute with urgency, reflect with precision. And that's why, in the same 24 hours we all get, they build empires. Because to them, every second is sacred. Now listen closely. The 1% do not chase balance. They chase alignment. They don't believe in equal parts comfort and ambition. They believe in seasons of obsession. Seasons where everything else gets quiet so their dream can get loud. They go all in, not forever, but long enough to change the game. They understand that balance doesn't birth breakthroughs. Intensity does. They're not afraid of burnout because they build their fire from purpose, not pressure. Purpose doesn't exhaust, it energizes. It anchors them when life shakes. It fuels them when the world sleeps. That's why the 1% don't need motivation. They have something deeper. Conviction. The kind that doesn't waver. The kind that survives failure. The kind that refuses to negotiate because they've already decided who they are before the results show up. And that identity? It drives everything. They don't wake up hoping to feel inspired. They wake up already chosen, already committed, already in motion. This is what separates them. They don't need the external to validate the internal. They move without applause. They build without followers. They show up before the world is watching. And when the world finally notices, it looks like they blew up overnight. But you and I know that overnight was forged in years of invisible work, in silence, in solitude, in sweat, in the hours they trained while others talked, in the mornings they rose while others rolled over, in the sacrifices no one saw but everyone now benefits from. The 1% live in what most fear, boredom. They repeat the same fundamentals with monk-like discipline. While others chase novelty, they chase mastery. They understand the difference between average and elite is repetition. Relentless, focused, undistracted repetition. That's how they become exceptional. Let's talk about clarity. The 1% have a relationship with clarity that the rest avoid. They know exactly who they are and exactly who they are not. They don't dilute their dreams to fit someone else's mold. They don't water down their fire to make others comfortable. They don't explain themselves to the uninspired. Because they know that clarity creates courage. And courage creates momentum. And momentum? That's everything. The masses wait for momentum. The 1% create it. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They don't wait for confidence. They move in spite of doubt because they know confidence isn't the fuel. It's the result. You act, you build. You build, you believe. You believe, you rise. And rise they do. Now let's talk about risk. The 1% take it. Not recklessly, but relentlessly. They bet on themselves. While most hedge, they leap. While most overthink, they over-prepare. And then they move fast, decisively, boldly. They understand. Security is an illusion. The only real safety is in skill, adaptation, and mindset. And they build all three. Because they're not trying to survive, they're built to thrive. Even in chaos, even in crisis. Because the 1% aren't just thinkers, they're builders. They build when it's hard, they build when it's lonely, they build when there's no guarantee. They don't ask, what if it fails? They ask, what if I don't try? Because regret to them is the ultimate cost. Let's go deeper. The 1% don't separate life and work. They see life as their work. Every conversation is training. Every setback is data. Every interaction is an opportunity to refine their character. They don't clock out of growth. They don't take breaks from belief. They live inside the process. Not perfectly, but intentionally. They're not addicted to outcomes. They're obsessed with evolution. Because they know the outcome is just the echo of who they've become. Become better, get better results. That's the formula. But that requires radical ownership. No blame, no excuses, no waiting. The 1% don't outsource their power. They don't hand their future to trends, governments, markets, or moods. They take the wheel. And if the road doesn't exist, they build one. This is how the 1% think. Now ask yourself, what would happen if you thought like that? What would change if you stopped needing permission? If you stopped negotiating your worth? If you stopped waiting to feel ready and acted like you already were? Because here's the truth. You don't need more potential. You already have it. What you need is more alignment between what you believe and how you behave, between what you say and what you do, between the dream in your heart and the decisions in your day. The 1% have aligned their entire being with their vision. Not just their thoughts, but their habits. Not just their hopes, but their actions. And that alignment? That's where the magic lives. That's where momentum explodes. That's where doors open. That's where transformation begins. Not in the world, but in you. So ask yourself, what identity are you rehearsing? What story are you telling? What standards are you tolerating? Because the moment you decide to think like the 1%, your world begins to shift. Not someday. Now. Not when the fear disappears, but when your purpose speaks louder than your fear. Not when you're ready, but when you remember who you are. Because here's the final truth. You are not average. You are not ordinary. You are not here to blend in, bow down, or beg for crumbs. You are here to build, to become, to lead. And that requires a new way of thinking. Not soft, not small, not someday, but bold. Now, relentless, because the 1% don't wait for the world to change. They become the reason it does. So become that reason. Think like the 1%, act like it, live like it, and watch the world rise to meet you.